The sea was iron gray when I arrived at Evermere, and the gulls cried like lost souls over the crags. My trunk rattled in the boot, every pothole announcing how light a life may be when it has been pared down to one faded gown fit for a ball and 3 for daylight. I pressed my gloves smooth and told myself I was fortunate, companion to Lady Beatrice Montfort for the sennight of festivities, room and board, and a salary that might keep my mother from selling her pearls, if she still had them. Evermere rose from the headland like a legend. Battlements, arrow slits softened by ivy, a chapel clinging to the cliff as if it had been blown there by the North Sea wind and froze mid-gasp. Torches flared along the forecourt. A carriage and 4 took the gravel with elegant disdain. When the steps lowered, a gentleman in austerely cut black descended first and did not immediately offer his hand to anyone. I knew him at once. Every print shop in London had hawked his likeness last season. Benedict Hawke, 9th Duke of Evermere, future husband of my lady. He was taller than the engravings had allowed, and younger in the eyes, though those eyes were the color of rain clouds and spoke of a household where duty was a resident more constant than any guest. The Hawke signet ring flashed as he removed his glove to greet the Marquis of Montfort. I saw the faint constraint in the Duke's shoulders when Montfort took his arm in proprietary triumph. We all knew it. The Montfort dowry, the Evermere mortgages. Money binds even dukes. Miss Ada Harrow, announced a footman, and the great hall turned its honeyed candles toward me. I curtsied to Lady Beatrice, who was lovely the way a statue is lovely, all proportion and polish. She took my hand with cool civility. "You will sit with me at cards," she said. "Mamma grows fretful if I throw away guineas to amuse the gentlemen." "Of course," I murmured, and felt the Dowager Duchess's gaze move across me like a cane tapped on stone. The old lady's cap bristled with jet. She would not approve of anything that smacked of romance or novelty. I made my smile smaller and my curtsy deeper. We paraded to the drawing room. Mrs. Araminta Cobb, purveyor of London's most poisonous ondit, was already seated by the fire with her notebook in her lap and a smile that promised catastrophe. Lady Honoria Hawke, the Duke's sister, rescued me with a gleam of mischief. "You look as if you've swallowed a lemon, Miss Harrow. Come, tell me if you think the sea wilder here than at Brighton. My brother says the waves here have opinions." "I dare say they do, my lady," I said, and was rewarded with a laugh that drew the Duke's gaze across the room. It was a glance only, a flicker, like a swallow in twilight, but it struck with such clarity that I felt it to my bones. We had met then, without meeting. The evening passed in a show of leisure that felt, to me, like a game of battledore played over a precipice. Cards and consommé, a song coaxed from the pianoforte, talk of settlements in a corner where parchment rustled like dry leaves. I fetched Beatrice's shawl and placed it upon her shoulders. "Do not hover," she said gently, not unkind, as if she pitied the necessity of my hovering. After supper, the company walked out to see the long northern twilight gild the yew garden. Paths, straight as creeds, cut the dark hedges into a bishop's maze. Lanterns hung from iron crooks. The smell of damp earth and salt stung sweetly. I followed 2 paces behind Beatrice and the Duke, careful as a shadow. He dropped something, an envelope half-sealed perhaps. I stooped to retrieve it. By the time I straightened, he had turned. "Permit me," I said, and held it out. He did not take it at once. His gaze caught mine. For an instant, the wind and the lanterns and the murmured conversation fell away. Then, with the barest movement of his fingers, he pressed my hand as he accepted the missive, and in that press I felt something else. A small square folded upon itself, warmed by his palm. His voice was almost nothing. "Wait for me at midnight." I think I might have dropped the earth from my hands. Instead, I dropped my eyes. "Your Grace," I breathed, and knew not whether I meant yes or no. We rejoined the others. Montfort spoke loudly of improvements, of steam engines and pits, and the honest riches the earth could be made to yield if one were not timid. The Dowager stitched and looked saintly. Mrs. Cobb's pencil scratched like a mouse behind the wainscot. When I reached my bedchamber, I opened my hand. The square of paper was plain, the seal pressed with a hawk's head. Inside, a line. "The yew gate opposite the chapel. Bring no candle." I counted the hours until the house stilled. The wind fussed at the casement. Sophie, my maid, breathed the soft little sighs of the just asleep. I slipped on my pelisse and crept into the corridor, as silent as a scandal not yet spoken aloud. The chapel. Bell had no bell rope. It was rung by the sea, they said, when storms were due. The clock in the hall would be my only herald. I found the garden door. The stone was cold. I lifted the latch. The first stroke of midnight sounded deep as a vow. Then, a hand shot out from the dark and caught my wrist. "Forgive me," he said, and my name was there, unsaid, in the warmth of his voice. The lanterns had been doused. The yews held the moonlight like, secrets cupped in 100 green palms. His fingers loosened, but he did not let go until the second stroke had faded. I could think of no safer moment than this. No moment with me is safe, I said. Before I could recall, I was meant to be sensible. Your Grace, if we are seen, we shall not be. He drew me into the shelter of an alcove where the hedge made a little room and the scent of cut yew was sharp as a blade. Miss Harrow, Ada, this is ill done of me. I am to wed. Duty prevents the words I most wish to speak. The wind pressed his coat against him. The hawk signet rose and fell with his breath. But duty cannot blind me to wrong. I am snared, and you may be the only soul able to slip the knot. Say it plain, I whispered, my pulse beating in my throat like a trapped bird. Montfort holds my mortgages, he said. That you know. What you may not know is the means by which he secured them. A mining lease, illicit, on land that is not his to grant, and never was. Revenues concealed, tenants displaced on sham pretexts. I suspected, I could not prove. My brother knew more. His voice caught, a break like the sea tearing white on rocks. He left notes, letters, warnings. Then he rode the cliff road in a storm and did not return. I swallowed. I am sorry. So am I. For a year I have endured the Marquess's terms for Evermere's sake. Now he presses the final barter. My hand for his daughter's dowry and my silence for his misdeeds. He looked away, toward the black blade of the chapel roof. I would rather stand poor upon these stones than barter honor for gold. But the law is not swift. It is a slow old beast. If I break the engagement without proof, he forecloses, and the cottages on my estate go cold. And if you marry without protest, you are bound to him by law and kin both, I murmured. The wind brought the salt to my tongue. Why me? Because you are in his camp and not of it, he said simply. Because you are no gossip. Because you see. He smiled then, sudden and small, as if my very existence surprised him into relief. Montfort keeps his private papers in a traveling snuff box, beneath a false base, and in a larger coffer above which hangs a print of St. Cuthbert blessing a stone cross. There is a mark repeated through the accounts, a tiny cross with a notch, Cuthbert's cross, the old fishermen call a landmark on the coast. My brother wrote of it. I cannot search Montfort's rooms. I am watched. You, as Lady Beatrice's companion, may fetch a shawl, a vinaigrette, and be thought nothing at all. I thought of Beatrice's cool hand in mine, of the way she had said do not hover, as if she wished me spared. If I am discovered, I am ruined. If you are discovered, he said, and the roughness in his voice burned. I will bear it. I will end it. I will see you safe, come what may. It was reckless to be moved by such words, and yet I was. What am I to find? A key first, he said. Small, brass, with reversed wards. My brother's note says Montfort keeps it in a snuff box carved with griffins, an heirloom. The ledger itself, if it exists, will be in the chapel walls or near them. Old Cuthbert the gardener will know where the cross stood before the sea ate the cliff. Find the key, and we will find the truth. The third, fourth, fifth strokes washed over us, carving the hour into equal parts fear and resolve. And Beatrice? I asked. What of her heart? He did not flinch. She deserves truth as much as any soul under my roof. I do not know if her heart is engaged. I would speak to her brother, but Montfort keeps her apart, and her mother will not look me in the eye. I am marrying a contract drawn by men. His hand brushed mine. Accident, necessity, something perilously like need. I do not ask you to betray your lady. I ask you to save her from a father who believes daughters are coin. We stood very near. The hedge breathed its green cold. The sea muttered like an old judge. I felt the moment tilt, as if the earth itself inclined us toward the dangerous sweetness of a first kiss. I saw how such a kiss might undo both of us and yet make us truer than any vow. A shadow slid across the path beyond our alcove, no more than the brief darkening that happens when a cloud trespasses on the moon, and yet it bore the shape of a man. The lantern string stirred, though no lantern burned. Instinct tightened the Duke's hand around mine. Be still, he whispered. The shadow paused. I heard very faintly the rasp of breath. There was a scent in the air, stale and sweet together, the perfume of bergamot overlaying the harsher tang of rapis. Somewhere, metal clicked very soft, like the closing of a tiny lid, a snuff box. We were not alone. By morning, the garden's scent of yew had thinned, but the memory of a stale sweet tang, bergamot over rapis, clung to me like smoke. Whoever had shared our midnight hedgerow had breathed close. If it was the Marquess's solicitor, Mr. Silas Drake, I had no hour to waste. Sophie laced me briskly. You did not sleep, she murmured, noticing the bruised moons beneath my eyes. The sea talked, I said, and I listened. I kissed her cheek, a folly, and tucked my gloves on. If Lady Beatrice wakes dull, have a little strong tea ready. I shall fetch a vinaigrette. Her ladyship's mother is prone to megrims, and it might be wanted. You'll fetch it from... Where? Sophie asked, all innocence sharpened to a pin. From where it is, I said, and left before she could improve me with prudence. The guest passage near Montfort's apartments smelled of starch and steam. I met his valet, Richard, precise as a ledger, carrying a stack of fresh shirts. Her ladyship begs the loan of the vinaigrette, I said, lowering my voice to the tone of a person used to being forgettable. A headache. He hesitated, then inclined his head. His lordship rides with his grace. Quickly, if you please. He opened the dressing room and returned to his shirts. The Marquis's rooms were a map of his appetites. Cut glass, cologne, quills with keen nibs, a traveling dressing case fitted like a surgeon's kit. On the sideboard lay the snuff box I had seen, carved with griffins fighting among leaves, the lid's hinge fine as a watch. I reached for it and felt the pulse in my wrist. It opened with a delicate complaint of metal. Inside, a bed of rapie black as soil. Beneath it, the false base, just as Benedict had said. I worked the hairpin I had slid into my sleeve. The base resisted, then slipped with a sigh. There, nestled like a sinful thought, lay a key no longer than the first joint of my little finger. Brass, wards reversed, like teeth turned inward. My mouth went dry. A boot heel clicked in the corridor. I dropped the key into my glove and snapped the snuff box shut. From the dressing case, I seized a vinaigrette, silver, pierced, smelling of lavender, and turned toward the door as if I had always been the sort of woman who waltzed into a marquess's dressing room for trifles. The heel clicked again. The door stood ajar. A shadow crossed the threshold, narrow, spare. "Who's there?" came a voice, soft as paper. "Miss Harrow," I said, opening the door, wider with what I hoped was a housemaid's assurance. "Lady Montfort is afflicted." Mr. Pritchard said, "Afflicted how?" Mr. Drake's eyes, gray as wet granite, swept the room. He flicked open his own snuff box, inhaled, closed it with that tiny kiss of metal I had heard in the yews. "Our household is generous to the faint and the foolish. Do not trouble yourself." He held out his hand for the vinaigrette. "I shall deliver it directly," I said, with a small smile that pretended I had a mistress who would take my loyalty amiss if I surrendered it. I dipped him a curtsy and escaped, pulse roaring down the corridor. At the corner, I nearly collided with Lady Beatrice. She was pale, though it became her. "Ada, where have you been?" "Mamma is quite well, thank you. It is I who woke with a head. The sea is loud." I held up the silver oval. "Forethought," I said, injecting lightness. "I hoped to be of use." Her gaze slid past me to the Marquess's door. "In my father's corridor, there is a moment when one may either curtsy to the truth and be destroyed, or curtsy to a lie and be bought. Mr. Pritchard keeps the better essences," I said, and let my lashes fall as if abashed by my presumption. "I would not have disturbed your father's valet had I not thought of you." A beat, too, during which my whole future balanced like a teacup on a coach step. Then Beatrice's shoulders loosened. "You are kind," she said softly, and I felt the cruelty of that kindness like a knife turned gently. "Bring it to me, then." "And Ada?" "Yes, my lady?" She glanced again toward the door. "Do not hover," a ghost of a smile, "but do not leave me quite alone." I followed her to her chamber, where sunlight sifted through muslin, and the sea wrote its endless letter against the rocks. She took the ow, vinaigrette breathed, and some of the pinched line between her brows eased. I should have rejoiced. Instead, the brass weight in my glove burned like a secret brand. "Will you sit with me at breakfast?" she asked. "Mamma will speak settlements with Papa. I had rather talk of ribbons." "Gladly," I said, though my stomach had tied itself into a fisherman's knot. Downstairs, the great hall hummed. The Dowager Duchess picked bones from kippers with a neat ruthlessness. Mrs. Cobb buttered gossip like hot toast. My eyes flew to the terrace, where I saw Benedict return from his ride, hair rucked by wind, cheek flushed by speed. He looked once across the hall, quick and sharp, and I knew he read in my face that my glove held a future. "Miss Harrow," Beatrice said, following my glance with that infuriating calm of hers. "Your glove bulges. What have you there?" My heart stopped, started, and hammered. She reached for my hand. Her fingertips touched the hidden brass. "Ada," she said low. "What is that?" "It is my thimble," I said, smiling the way one smiles when one's foot is on rotten plank and the river flows 5 feet below. Sophie tucked it there. I have a way of mislaying it. Beatrice's fingers paused, then retreated, polite as a bow. "You and your little economies." A pause, as if she wished to say something kinder, and could not find a shape for it. "Try the kedgeree. It is unusually forgiving." Forgiving. I could have laughed if laughter were not a noise that shakes out secrets. I ate dutifully. Across the table, Mrs. Cobb scribbled. The Dowager murmured about the chapel flower garlands. The Marquis spoke to Drake in the low murmur of men measuring outcomes. When Benedict left his seat, I felt it almost before I saw him move. The hawk knows the stir of air when another bird takes wing. That evening, the ballroom blossomed. Chandeliers threw down constellations. Silk rustled. The first violins sketched out a country dance with a flirtatious thread of flutes. I had dressed Beatrice in pale blue and calm. She glowed like dawn on water. I took my place behind the palms with the other companions, useful and invisible, and tried not to remember how his hand had closed on my wrist in the yews. "Partners for the set!" cried the master of ceremonies. A small confusion, a lady out of place, a gentleman distracted, and the pattern shifted. "You, Miss Harrow," said Lady Honoria, who had taken possession of me with the cheery tyranny of a general. "You must stand up, else the numbers are wrong. Think of the poor fiddlers." I began, but the line had already caught me. I found myself opposite Benedict. His bow was perfect. Mine shook. We stepped in, hands, touching and parting as the figures called us into proximity and away again. "Can you bear to speak while we are watched?" he asked into the pattern. "Only if you speak nothing at all," I said, and felt his laughter like heat in winter. We turned, changed places, and our hands met again. Brief, electric. "I have it," I breathed. "The key." "God keep you," he said under the violins, as if it were a prayer. "Then hear me. My brother's last paper, Shen, bore Montfort's seal but altered. The hawk, ours, was impressed over it to disguise the origin, and yet the under seal showed through at the edge, a cross scored with a little notch at its base. Cuthbert's cross. The fishermen marked their safe channel with it on the old coast stones. We cast off, laughter covering us like a cloak. "There is a stone," I said, "beside the chapel path, carved shallow as if with a dull blade. I saw it this morning. A notch." "The chapel has a void beneath the altar," Benedict murmured as we came face to face again. "A mason's pocket," Cuthbert wrote of when the chapel was rebuilt after the storm of '93. "If Montfort's ledger is anywhere within these walls, it is in that hollow. The key, will it fit?" I asked. "The wards are reversed," he said, eyes quick with danger and delight. "The lock must answer to the same perverse logic. Will you come at dawn? Honoria, we'll walk with you. Even the dowager cannot scold a sister for piety." We broke, reformed, rejoined hands. Every touch was a spark, every separation, a winter. "At dawn," I said, though my heart had already gone ahead to kneel on cold stones, while the wind chased Latin through cracked glass. We finished the set. Applause pattered like rain on panes. He bowed, but his eyes did not leave mine until they must. I had scarcely regained the shelter of palms when the Marquis's shadow fell upon me. "Miss Harrow," his voice was velvet on a scabbard. "You dance very prettily for a paid companion." "I beg your pardon, my lord," I said, keeping my gaze at a respectful level below the dreadful amusement in his. He toyed with the griffin snuff box, lid flicking, closing, flicking, a cat with a sparrow. "I believe I saw you in my corridor this morning. Or was it my imagination? At my age, one's fancies are either gout or ghosts." "Lady Beatrice was unwell," I said, the lie practiced now, smooth as a pen stroke. "Your valet was kind enough to lend the vinaigrette. I hope I did not transgress. Kindness is a weed in some soils," he murmured. He stepped nearer. Bergamot turned the air stale. "A small brass curiosity has gone astray from my room. A trifle only. If you should see such a thing. Keys go a-wandering in old houses. Restore it to me at once. It would be a pity if your admirable thrift were mistaken for pilfering." "I should never mistake a key for a coin, my lord," I said, and felt the sweat cold at the nape of my neck. "I will keep my eyes open." "Do," he said, and his smile did not reach his eyes. He drifted away like a dark thought one cannot dismiss. Honoria materialized at my elbow. "He makes my teeth itch," she said cheerfully. "Come, pretend to admire the floral arch with me, and speak very fast in a tone of admiration about roses while telling me what must be done," I told her, between ohs and ahs at white lilies. "Dawn," she said, delighted. "I adore crimes of piety. I shall wear my plain bonnet and carry a prayer book. You will carry your guilt like a heroine, which is to say with excellent posture." "Honoria," I said, throat tight, "if we fail, we shall not," she said. "But if we do, we shall fail with style." Benedict passed behind us, and though we did not look, I felt the word he sent like a pebble dropped into my palm. Courage. We turned from the lilies, and nearly collided with Mr. Drake. He clicked his snuff box open, shut, open again, eyes steady on my face. "Miss Harrow," he said softly, "have you ever noticed how some locks prefer to be persuaded rather than forced?" He smiled without warmth. "One must have the right key." The lid snapped shut. "What key?" he asked. At dawn, the sea wore a sheet of pewter, and the wind gnawed the edges of the world. Honoria met me in the corridor with a plain bonnet and a prayer book fat with mischief. "For show," she said, tucking my arm into hers. "We are models of devotion, Miss Harrow. If the dowager catches us, we admire quatrefoils and talk about saints. If Mr. Drake catches us, we faint from zeal. I have not the art of fainting," I said, teeth chattering as we stepped into the courtyard. "But I have the key." "Then you have the art that matters." The chapel clung to the cliff as if it had grown there. Its little bell-coat was chipped. Its door swelled with salt and age. Old Cuthbert was already at his broom, sweeping the night's sand from between the flags. His cap sat on his head like a nesting rook. "Her ladyship's sister," he croaked, seeing Honoria. "And Miss Harrow. The sea brought you, eh? She brings all truth in time." "We hope she will bring us a tale," Honoria said, cheerful as sunrise. "Old stories about St. Cuthbert's cross." His eyes, milky with years, grew shrewd. "Aye, we had a great stone once. Marked so. His gnarled thumb traced an invisible notch. Guided boats through the sound. Storm of 93 cracked it. Mason set a bit of it under the altar for luck. I told the last Duke. He laughed and said, "A saint's luck would not hurt us." The last Duke wrote of a Mason's pocket, I said, the wind stealing my breath. A hollow? Cuthbert shuffled to the chancel rail and tapped the worn step. "There's a loose sound here. Give me your ear and your patience." He went down on creaking knees and rapped the stone. Hollow answered like a muffled drum. Honoria's hand found mine. Our fingers knit. "Ada, I will try," I said, and had to blow on my fingers before they could obey me. The altar stone was colder than right conduct. I slipped the small brass key from my glove. It flashed, wicked and clever in the thin light. There was a seam cunningly disguised along the base of the altar. Behind a panel of lime-washed oak, my fingertips found iron, old and stubborn with a keyhole no larger than a pea. I eased the key in. It balked, like a horse that knows a stranger hand. I tried again, gentler, then, with the firmness the village smith once taught me when I brought father's broken lock. Not violence, but authority. The wards caught, then jarred and refused. The key would not turn. Honoria bent close. "What if reversed wards?" I muttered. "Every tooth faces contrary." I turned the key the other way. Nothing. Cuthbert cocked his head. Old Tom Clegg, Mason to my father. He'd say some locks prefer the left hand. They're shy of right hands. Like some mares. I swapped hands, my left clumsy with cold. Still the lock sulked, unforthcoming. Sweat pricked under my stays despite the chill. Footsteps sounded outside. A crunch of gravel that was too precise for chance. Honoria's head lifted. I saw the cheerful mischief fold up like a paper toy. "Someone is coming." "Under," Cuthbert hissed, pointing to the box pews. "Go under. I'll talk weather at him until it hails." I slid on my knees, into the narrow dark beneath the pew, skirts catching splinters, heart a drum. Honoria knelt as if in prayer. Cuthbert resumed his broom with a show of indifference. The door scraped open, complaining. Mr. Drake's voice was the first chill. "Good morning. I heard piety. How the wind does carry tales," Honoria said warmly. "Mr. Drake, how fortunate. You, who are so well versed in statutes, will admire our chapel's statutes." She smiled with such blithe idiocy that I loved her. He came up the aisle, each step measured. From my hiding, I saw only his boots. Blacking bright, heels exact. He paused beside the chancel. The snuff box clicked. Bergamot soured the air. "I never begrudge ladies their devotions," he said. "Only their trespasses." Cuthbert's broom rasped. "Trespasses for cows and lawyers. Ladies pray." "I believe in categories," Drake said, and crouched. His fingers touched the step where my knees had left a warmth only my terror could feel. Then, very slowly, his hand slid to the pew's edge and down. It fumbled along the floorboards, toward the hem of my pelisse caught on a splinter. Honoria coughed. "Mr. Drake, did you ever read Mrs. Chapone? She says a woman's best ornament is modesty." "How consoling," he murmured, and his hand closed softly on wool. The pelisse tugged against my ankle. "Miss Harrow," he said, not loud, not soft. "Come out." For 3 heartbeats, I was sure my disgrace would be settled then and there, under a pew like a mouse cornered by a cat. But the chapel door banged wide. "Drake!" boomed a voice that rolled like surf. The Marquis himself. "Leave catechism to the parsons and attend me. A courier has arrived." Drake's fingers tightened, then released. He rose in a smooth line. "My lord." I did not move. Honoria's prayer became for once a real one. Cuthbert's broom kept time with my breathing. The men's voices retreated. The door side shut. The wind spoke again. Only then did Honoria reach under and find my hand. We slipped out like contraband. "Go," she whispered. "If they return, we must try again," I said, throat raw with relief and cold. "The lock has a whim I do not yet know. And now we must have breakfast and a composure," she said. "And perhaps, God shield us, a scandal." We had not even reached the hall when we met it. The footmen were all aflutter. The dowager sat like a carved saint with her teacup untouched. Mrs. Cobb, theatrical in her modesty, held aloft a sheet printed so fresh that the ink had not quite dried. The morning ondit, brought north by Montfort's courier to feed the party its daily bread of poison. Her voice purred as she read, "A certain ducal house by the Ewe. Northern sea shelters a rumor that prefers moonlight. We are assured that a midnight assignation in a clipped garden betokens not bridal bliss, but an unseasonable hawk stooping elsewhere. Names withheld, for now." A rustle went through the room like wind through wheat. The dowager's eyes slid to me as a sword slides from a scabbard. Beatrice, very still, folded the newspaper once, twice, until the words were hidden. "Miss Harrow," the dowager, said, "attend me." I followed her into a little anteroom where the air had been stripped of kindness. She shut the door and turned, small and terrible. "You will not speak to my son unless I am present. You will not appear in his path. You will not breathe where he breathes. If you have any virtues, and I am assured by the charitable that you possess thrift, you will pack them and yourself into your trunk and be ready to quit Evermere if I command it. Do you understand? Yes, your grace, I said, because anything else would have been suicide. Her gaze pinned me like an insect. I have never blamed poverty for its poverty. I do blame it when it grows teeth. Do not bite above your station. She left me to the taste of those words. When I returned to the hall, my body remembered how to be a shadow. Benedict stood with Montfort at the far hearth. He inclined his head to me with the same cool civility he gave the under-butler. No word, no look. Only the hawk ring turned once on his finger, as if it too were restless. He was protecting me. I knew it by how it burned. Honoria joined me at the window. Mama has unsheathed all her saints, she said lightly. Do not be alarmed if Saint Jerome hurls a thunderbolt. He is partial to obedience. I have been cautioned, I said. I have also been printed. Mrs. Cobb will sip tea until she has wrung every drop of sting from that paragraph, Honoria said. Meanwhile, we must think. The key? In my glove, I whispered. The lock will not answer. Then let us seek a mind that whispers to old locks. She tapped the glass, summoning Mr. Nathaniel Reed from the terrace. The steward came in with the weather on his hair and respect in his bow. Mr. Reed, Honoria said, as if asking about barley, have you ever seen a lock that refused its own key? Aye, he said. Fisher chests sometimes. Old men, cautious of sons-in-law, would have the smith make wards right strange. They'd turn contrariwise or ask a pressure here. He pressed the base of his thumb to the side of his palm. Or prefer the left hand, as old Tom liked to say. And some won't stir without hearing a click you cannot make unless the key's seated deep as it will go. Thank you, I breathed. He looked from my face to Honoria's and blessedly asked nothing more. If you should want a new prayer cushion in the chapel, miss, you've only to ask, he said for the benefit of any ears. I'll fetch one presently. Montfort's laugh cut the air. Your grace, he was saying to Benedict, how delightful that the capital does us the honor of noticing our little party. Fame is a tax laid on consequence. Benedict did not glance at me. I dislike taxes, he said, and turned away. Through the day, his coldness held like a second wind off the sea. At luncheon, he spoke to Beatrice with all tenderness due. In the afternoon, he rode out with her mother. At cards, he lost a modest sum with an air of absent content. Only once, when I bent to retrieve a dropped card near his chair, did I catch the smallest betrayal. A word written in the dust on the floor with the tip of a gloved finger. There and gone as a footman. Past. Courage. It steadied me even when Mrs. Cobb, all innocent inquiry, asked if companions ever walked in gardens by moonlight to compose their thoughts. I prefer my bed, I said, and smiled as if I slept well. Beatrice found me at twilight and pressed my hand. Do not hover, she whispered, voice unsteady, but do not leave me either. I will not, I said, and meant it. Night rose. The house quieted in stages, as if an orchestra were laying down instruments one by one. In my chamber, Sophie brushed my hair and said nothing until the brush made a nest of light on the dressing table. Then, Miss Ada, if you are ever to faint, try doing it in a duchess's lap. People forgive you things. I will practice, I said, smiling because tears would have betrayed me. When she had gone, an envelope slid beneath my door. No seal, only a single line in a hand I now knew as well as my own. Breath. Some locks answer the left hand, some to a turn contrary to habit, some to faith. I pressed the paper to my mouth as if it might be warm. Then another paper rustled under the door, this one folded from a newspaper, its edge stained where fresh ink had met damp. By order of the Dowager Duchess, Miss Ada Harrow, to be prepared to depart at noon tomorrow. I sat very still while the sea clawed at the cliff. Between my palm and my glove lay the key. Between me and my life lay one more try at a stubborn lock. At dawn, I would go back to the chapel, if I could get there before they sent me away. I rose before the birds had decided whether the light was worth the trouble. The sea gnawed, patient as an old solicitor. Sophie slept face down like a small martyr. I slipped from her without a sound and wrapped my pelisse about me as if it could be courage. The dowager's order, depart at noon, sat in my bodice like a stone. I had this morning and no more. Mist lay in the yew garden like breath held too long. The chapel's door sulked on its hinges but yielded. St. Cuthbert looked down from his painted window with his bland, inconvenient serenity. I knelt where the steps sounded hollow and found the seam with my fingertips. Every splinter a little sermon on prudence. Brass kissed iron. The key balked. Left hand, Mr. Reed had said. Contrary. Turn. Deep as it will go. I seated it until the cold bit my skin. The wards settled with a sensation felt more than heard, as if an obstinate creature had recognized an old friend. I turned, slowly, against habit, and the lock answered with a quiet click so intimate it made my throat ache. The panel shifted. Salt breath exhaled from the dark. Inside lay a shallow cavity lined with old oak. In it sat a narrow iron coffer bound with a strap like a miser's belt. Its lock wore the same perverse smile as the first. Again the key resisted until I coaxed it. Again the left hand, the contrary turn. Again that consenting click. The lid rose. It smelled of iron and old smoke. A ledger lay at top, buckram wrapped, corners greased with use. Beneath it, papers folded flat, a seal slumped with age. The hawk device impressed over another, just as Benedict had told me, beneath whose edges the faint impression of a cross peeped, nicked at its base. Cuthbert's cross. The hair on my arms lifted. My fingers shook as I opened the ledger. Columns marched like soldiers. Figures danced their sly jig. Names of tenants, dates, outputs, rents. Then, crammed in a smaller hand, lines of extraordinary disbursements, signed by A. Montfort. Then a second column in the same months, the sums corresponding to a company I did not know. A shell, a shadow, deriving profit twice over from a mindset on land the ledger itself described as least doubtful title. Notes in the margin, in a different hand, firm, slanted, concealed by Montfort's agent. Pressure applied to Evermere. Beware the cross-marked contracts. H.H. the late Duke, Benedict's father. There was a letter, too, addressed to my son in a steadier hand than the jotted marginalia. The seal had been broken and mended. I dared not wonder by whom. I read, if the worst comes, you must know I chose the debt for the sake of keeping the men in work through the harsh winter of 16. Montfort offered relief and took twice in secret. He holds me by my pride and the law's slowness. I am ashamed not of the debt, but of my blindness. Your brother rode out to take copies to Mr. Justice Pelham. He had gone to Cuthbert's Cross to meet the steward when the storm struck. If I do not live to you, why? Mend this. Do not let him bind you with marriage to cover fraud. Expose him in a public room with witnesses, or he will laugh in your face in private and claim misrecollection. I pressed my lips to the paper where the word ashamed had made the ink bite deeper. The chapel shook with wind. I imagined Benedict kneeling where I knelt, a boy turned duke in a sentence. Ada? Honoria's whisper touched the door. Are you whole? I dragged breath into Waikiki, my lungs. Come, I said, and when she reached me, I placed the ledger in her hands. It is worse than we feared, and better. There is proof. Her face lit with a ferocity that made her beautiful and a little frightening. Then my brother is free. Are we? I asked, thinking of Beatrice's composed face and the way she had folded the ondite until its poison could not stain her gloves. If the Marquis is ruined by this, he will ruin others in falling. He will not tumble alone. Let him gnash, she said. Truth is not obliged to soften itself for villains. She turned the ledger, quick eyes skimming the columns. Ada, this is a noose. We must make it visible where even Mrs. Cobb can sketch it. The Dowager sends me away at noon, I said. We have hours only. Then we shall spend them like sovereigns. Honoria snapped the ledger shut and tucked it beneath her shawl. We copy as much as we can. Reed will know which pages cry loudest. We lock the rest again. Footsteps crunched the gravel outside. Not the casual dragging of a villager, not the uneven skip of Cuthbert's broom, a measured tread. Honoria froze. The ledger seemed suddenly to shout from under her arm. The latch lifted. We had a breath, no more, to choose our ruin. It was Benedict. He slipped inside, wind-flushed, hair spiked by the sea, and shut the door behind him with the softest click. Relief came so violently that my knees startled against the stone. He crossed to us, took one look at the ledger under Honoria's shawl, and just for a heartbeat, his face was that of a man reprieved. You did it, he said, and on the word you there was such gratitude that I had to turn away. He gathered us near the chancel rail, the chapel close as a conspirator. I can keep up civility to scorpions a week more and not complain, he said low, but I cannot marry falsehood. With this, listen to the rest, I said, and put the late Duke's letter into his hands. His eyes moved, his jaw set hard at ashamed. He touched the line about exposing Montfort in a public room with witnesses as if it could cut him and he would welcome the pain. When he looked up, the rain color had sharpened to steel. Then it ends, he said. Today. A gust shouldered the little building, rattling the glass. If you ended in private, he forecloses at noon, I said. He said so. As did I, came a voice from the porch, precise as a knife set down on marble. Montfort stood in the doorway with Mr. Drake, a respectful shadow at his shoulder. Rain had found the Marquess and beaded his lashes. It did not make him less dangerous. He took in the tableau in a glance, the ledger half hidden, my guilty breath, Benedict's stillness, and smiled, slightly as men do when a chessboard declares itself. My dear Evermere, he said, such piety. You are never so devout as when account books are near the altar. Benedict did not move. You keep your sins in holy places, he said, very calm. They are safer there from men with consciences. Montfort lifted a hand. Drake passed him a parchment tied with red tape. Let us forego epigrams. Here is the sum and schedule of your obligations. And, here, Drake produced a second document. Is a notice of foreclosure executed in due form and to be delivered to your steward at noon should any impediment attend the union of our families. My blood went cold and hot at once. You would starve a county to keep a fraud from the light, I said before wisdom could clap a hand over my mouth. He looked at me with bland surprise, as if a chair had spoken. The county may apply to Parliament for its bread, Miss Harrow. I am occupied with honor. My daughters. Honoria's chin rose. Your daughter's honor wants truth more than your money does. Montfort did not so much as blink. Truth is a public luxury and a private nuisance. We will indulge it at the proper hour. Meanwhile, the bride awaits her wedding, the Duchess her consolations, and the ton its spectacle. I propose we give them what they came for. If you jilt Beatrice Evermere, you go to your knees to your tenants tonight with nothing in your larder to offer them but sermons. He tapped the ledger. Just a brush. Nothing so crude as a snatch. And if any curious book emerges, why, I shall say a companion, dismissed for misconduct, concocted it to increase her value in the eyes of a romantic young duke. Who will Mrs. Cobb believe? My solicitor or your, what is she? Your moonlit fancy. The insult found its mark, but not the one he meant. Benedict stepped once nearer, and the air between them struck sparks. You will not speak of Miss Harrow so. I will speak of her as the world will, Montfort said, unless you are prudent. Prudence, Benedict said, and looked at me as if the word bled. If I announce an end, he starves them. If I submit, I live for years with rot in my house. Marry me, Montfort said smoothly, and we shall set our lawyers to amuse themselves with figures while you learn happiness. Your tenants will bless your name for keeping their hearths lit. A duke cannot eat glory. I tasted salt. I did not know if it was my tears or the sea finding a crack. Beatrice's face came to me, newly grave, newly uncertain. Mrs. Montfort's tremor at cards. The cottages dotted along the headlands, smoke thin as lace. I wanted to say, choose me, and we will wring truth from him together. But the day had hard edges, and simple arithmetic, noon, notices, hunger. Benedict, I said, and his name in my mouth felt too dear for this world. You must proceed. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. No, until we can expose him before witnesses. Honoria cut in, quick and fierce. The settlements, this evening. He cannot swallow a ledger in the library with half the county watching. Let him open his mouth to sign. We will fill it with his own ink. Montfort laughed. A thin silver sound like a knife ringed on crystal. You imagine theatricals. How pretty. Pretty or not, Benedict said. I will not have you dictate my conscience. He turned to me, a question burning. Do you truly ask this of me? I nodded because the cottages were crowding into my chest. Save them. For a day. For a night. For as long as it takes to put light on the page. After that, my voice failed. After that, what? A duchess with a husband who had learned her name too late. A companion dismissed to a village inn with her reputation smudged beyond laundering. Montfort, satisfied, tucked the parchment back beneath his arm. Excellent. Then we are agreed. The reading of the marriage settlements. 8 o'clock in the library. Witnesses, as is proper. We shall all sign what we must. His smile grew cordial, like frost pretending to be lace. And I shall expect the chapel doors to be kept locked henceforward. Too much draught for piety. He withdrew. The door shut on his scent of bergamot and the soft snick of Drake's snuff-box. Silence pooled. The three of us stood among saints who had seen uglier bargains. At last Benedict spoke, roughened. Very well, 8 o'clock. We copy what we can. We put men in the room who know what these columns mean. He lifted the ledger as a man lifts a standard. And then, Ada, a bell. Out on the headland began to peal, not for prayer but for weather. The sea struck the cliff in a new, meaner rhythm. Somewhere in the castle a clock answered, counting us mercilessly toward evening. And then, he said, we choose. A footman's voice, far off, called the hour and the summons. All to the library at 8 for the reading of the settlements. I felt the ground tilt, as if the cliff had shifted under the chapel's keel. Tonight, then. Tonight, or never. By afternoon, the sky had lowered until it sat on Evermere like a grief. The wind found every chink in the stone and made a song of it. Honoria and I worked at the library table beneath the painted stare of hawks long dead, our heads bent over foolscap while Mr. Reed sharpened quills with a pocket knife he treated like a sacrament. We take the loudest pages, Honoria said, crisp as flint. The double columns, the mot, cross-marked contracts, the marginal hand. If Montfort swallows the rest, he still chokes on these. Reed laid out sand, dried each copy, stacked them with reverence. I'll slip affidavits among 'em, he said, voice low. Old Tamsin's boy was turned off that pit when his rent rose sudden. We've 3 more who'll swear to the cross mark. They'll come to the courtyard at 8 on my word, keep their caps in their hands and their wits in their pockets. God bless you, I said, because I could say nothing else without tears. Honoria tucked 2 packets into the false bottom of her reticule. One for the settlements room, she said. One for catastrophe. And the ledger? I asked. We return it to the altar, she replied. Let Montfort sniff the lock until his nose freezes. Our work is in ink now. As we crossed the hall with the book wrapped in her shawl, the dowager's gaze brushed me, like winter. I dropped a curtsy to Bone and Jet and moved on. In the chapel, the key remembered me. The lock, once coy, yielded with a sigh of recognition. I set the ledger back into its iron cradle and closed the panel as if tucking a child against weather. The wind rattled the little bell as though applauding. 8 o'clock, Honoria whispered. We will make the library a stage and the law our chorus. The storm thickened. At 5, Mrs. Cobb sat in a window with ink like war paint and wrote paragraphs that looked from where I stood like serpents. At 6, the house settled to dress. I laced Beatrice into white satin with seed pearls sewn like dew. She watched her reflection as if it were a stranger she was obliged to entertain. You are very beautiful, I said. It felt like lighting a candle in a gale. Beauty is an occupation, she murmured. One may be diligent and still not. Excel. I smoothed her sleeve. Our eyes met in the glass. Have you ever wished to be careless? Every day, she said so softly I almost doubted it. Then quickly, too quickly, do not hover. I will be near, I promised, and she permitted me a small smile that looked like mercy and felt like farewell. The wind pushed me out to the terrace where Benedict stood under the lee of a buttress, hair ruffled, cravat askew as if he had wrestled duty in his dressing room and escaped half-tied. He did not speak at once. He looked at the house, the cliff, the line where sea married sky as if he were trying to memorize what he might lose. Reed has the men, I said. Honoria has the copies. I returned the ledger. And I have you, he said simply, and the honesty of it undid me. We must be banner and drum at once, I said, laughing because I could not weep. Do not falter when the ondit scribbles. Do not soften when the dowager hardens. When Drake objects, say produce your books until he chokes on it. I will. He took my hands, gentle yet certain, as if he feared startling a wild thing, and also knew it had chosen to stand. Ada, the wind stole his word. It thrust us closer, and I could see the salt beaded in his lashes, the fine white line near his temple where some boyhood fall had cut him. We were umbrellas in a gale, bent toward the same point by the same force. If we fail, I said, because I must test the ice before I stepped, you must marry her, and I must go. If we fail, he said, and his breath was warm even in that cold, I will seek the truth until it spits light. If they shut Evermere to me, I will stand on the cliff and shout it to the sea. If they shut London, I will shout it to the hills. And when I am too hoarse to shout, I will write it. I swear it. Then take something of mine to steady you, I whispered, and gave him the only thing I owned that might hold him when I could not. My first kiss. It was brief and bright, like flint on steel. The world did not end. It became for an instant almost bearable. He made a sound low in his throat and rested his brow to mine. If I go to hell for this, I will know the way by the salt on your skin. Footsteps scraped on stone. We sprang apart as Mr. Drake came round the buttress with that tidy look of a man who never creases unless he means to. He inclined his head, too courteous, too alert. Your Grace, Miss Harrow, the library awaits at 8. Do not be late. The law dislikes tardiness. We shall not be, Benedict said, cool as northlight. Drake's gaze dropped to my reticule as if he could hear paper breathe. How the wind frets, he said softly. It rattles locks. It opens things that ought to stay shut. He withdrew. The storm pressed his outline flat and then let it spring back. Go dress, Benedict said, voice steady again. Stand by Honoria at the reading. If I nod, you place the copies in Mrs. Cobb's lap and on the table. Reed brings the men as witnesses. We will not lose the hour. I will be there, I said. Courage. He smiled once, quick, private, and vanished into the gloaming. I had barely reached the corridor when a sound split the house. A scream, high, piercing, unmistakably female, tore down the stairwell like ripped silk. Beatrice's maid burst from the bedchamber, hair falling, eyes wild. Help, she cried. My lady's diamonds, her Riviere, they're gone. Nothing gathers people like a scream and a necklace. The corridor filled as if the house had exhaled its occupants. The dowager came with her stick, Mrs. Cobb with her sharpened gaze, Montfort and Drake with composure arranged like cravats. Beatrice stood very straight by her dressing table, white satin gleaming, hands composed at her waist. Only her eyes betrayed the shock, wide, dark, luminous with the sudden knowledge that innocence is not protection. The jewel case lay open like a mouth missing teeth. The velvet impressions where the Riviere had slept were naked as bruises. Search, Montfort said. The one word cracked like a whip. The servants first, then the companions, then, if need be, the guests. Papa, Beatrice said, quick color in her cheeks. Surely nothing, he replied, not looking at her. Thieves do not announce themselves. Drake's smile apologized to the room for existing. Regrettable, routine. No one of virtue will object to the demonstration of it. He nodded to Pritchard. Begin. They began with maids' aprons and footmen's pockets, with the smooth burr of practiced fingers. Sophie bristled. I caught her eye and shook my head. Be still. Let the storm pass. When they came to me, the world narrowed to a reticule and a pair of gloves. I handed both over. My heart beat not in my chest, but in the pulse of my name moving from mouth to mouth. Miss Harrow, Miss Harrow. Drake opened the reticule with fastidious care. Paper rustled, the faint breath of our copies, concealed in Honoria's false. Bottom, not mine. Mine held only my vinaigrette, a needle case, 2 pins, a ribbon, and a glitter. Drake drew it forth between his forefinger and thumb, a diamond clasp like a drop of frozen lightning, the tongue of it smeared with the ghost of wax. He turned it. Stones talked light onto the ceiling. My mouth went dry. That is not mine. You ladies own such baubles, Drake agreed, and yet hospitality lends what it must. I have not been in my room this hour, I said. Anyone might. Montfort's voice slid in, smooth as oil. I believe I saw Miss Harrow leaving my daughter's apartments not 10 minutes past. Companions hover. We forgive them. Honoria stepped forward, fury balanced by breeding. Drake, you know perfectly well. Honoria, the dowager said, all iron and velvet. Allow the law its due. Miss Harrow, explain how her ladyship's clasp found its way into your effects. I cannot, I said. The truth would not bend itself into the small polite shapes they wanted. I did not take it. Mrs. Cobb's pencil danced. How thrilling! Beatrice, white as her gown now, took one step nearer. Ada would not, she said, but the sentence trembled and broke on the reef of her upbringing. She would not, she repeated, softer to herself. Kindness is blind, Montfort murmured. Justice must wear spectacles. He turned, benevolent, as a hanging judge. Your Grace, this is delicate. The hour approaches when my daughter's name will be spoken alongside your son's before half Northumberland, and several titled witnesses. We cannot have the tale that a certain companion pilfered diamonds in the same house and was shielded by romance. The on-diet paragraph, like a thin knife, slid between my ribs. Benedict spoke from the doorway, voice level. No one will be shielded, nor condemned without cause. Drake bowed a hair. Then cause obliges us to dismiss Miss Harrow immediately and spare the household a magistrate's visit. Let the inn at Cold Harbor take her for the night. Her presence at Evermere is no longer, how shall I phrase it, useful. The room tilted. I saw, in a crystalline clarity sometimes granted to the doomed, how the staging served Montfort thrice. Remove the witness, stain her name, and warn Benedict that rebellion would carry a cost measured in cottage hearths and printed scandal. Your Grace? Drake inquired, eyes on the dowager. She did not look at me. Pack at once, Miss Harrow. You will be conveyed to the Cold Harbor Arms. Wages to quarter day in lieu. Mother, Benedict said. She lifted a hand. We do not harbor thieves. I am not, the word fractured. Beatrice, I said instead, because only she could still see me. Look at me. She did. Pain entered her gaze like a tide, slow, inexorable. Do not hover, she whispered. Then, as if the effort cost her, forgive me. Sophie, cheeks blazing, tried to seize my hand. Richard blocked her with a servant's perfect impersonal skill. I'll bring your trunk, he said to me, not unkind. Honoria moved, but the dowager's stare pinned her like a needle through a moth. Even Benedict, who could lift a county with a gesture when he pleased, found himself held against unseen glass. The settlements are at 8, his mother reminded the room. The wedding by special license tomorrow at 11. We will not add to our miseries with delay. He looked at me, and there was a battle in his eyes. Then he bowed a fraction. To me or to necessity, I could not tell. The wedding proceeds, he said, each word a knuckle bruised on stone. Tonight we review the settlements as arranged. Montfort's sow. Smile was a gentleman's good evening. They escorted me down the servant's stair as if I were porous to shame and might leak it on the main steps. Rain needled. The carriage waited like a verdict. Sophie slipped a small packet into my palm where no one saw. Her sewing case, I thought, and closed my fingers hard. Don't faint, she breathed. We'll do something braver. The driver cracked his whip. Evermere slid away, windows lit, a ship I had been tossed from. The road to Cold Harbor was black with rising water. In the public room, the innkeeper gave me a chamber at the back. Pity and curiosity mixed in his gaze. From Evermere, miss? Stormy weather. Very, I said, and when the door shut, my knees gave. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep the sob from being heard by planks and strangers. Then I opened Sophie's packet. Not needles. A flat parcel folded in oiled cloth. Inside lay a copy, one of Honoria's, of the worst page in the ledger. The double columns, the cross, the signature. A tread sounded on the stair. Quick, purposeful, cloaked by rain. Someone was coming for me. The tread halted outside my door. The latch tried itself, gently. I stood with Sophie's oiled cloth packet in one hand and a chair in the other, prepared to brain a villain and apologize to the landlord after. "Do not scream," whispered Honoria. Laughter, trembling under her breath like a candle in wind. "I have brought a cloak, a groom's pony, and a capacity for sin." The door opened on her grin and Sophie's fierce little face. "We could not leave you to faint like a moral lesson at the Cold Harbor Arms," Sophie said, shouldering past with a bundle. "Boots, miss, and take my old cloak. It will not mind the moor." "What of the settlements?" I asked, though my body had already decided to move, the way a heart decides to beat after a shock. "They are a pantomime," Honoria said. Montfort preened. Benedict held his temper. Mama drank fortitude. Drake sniffed the library like a hound and found nothing. "We have this instead." She tapped Sophie's bundle. "Reed fetched the ledger from the chapel the instant the house settled. It is heavy as a coffin. We mean to bring it to the wedding itself. Speak now, says the service. Well then, we shall." "Drake?" I breathed. "Has men on the coast road?" Sophie said. "So we shall go by the old peat track over the moor where only God and old Cuthbert know their feet. Come, miss. The tide eats the bridges and the burn is up." We went down the back stair and out into rain that had teeth. The innkeeper had the grace to look the other way. He would, I think, have blessed a witch that night if she had kissed his children and promised them good harvests. Honoria's pony snorted steam. Another beast pawed the yard, all ribs and gallantry. "For you," Honoria said to me and to Sophie. "You go pillion with me and shout like a banshee if I drowse." We set off, cloaks hard as sails, faces stung raw. The black line of the high road fell away. The moor took us, heather flattened under weather, pools glinting like open eyes, the land all shadowed sighs and old grudges. The ledger lay in a saddlebag against my thigh, iron-banded coffer strapped across Honoria's pommel. Every jolt said proof, proof, proof against my bones. Behind us, faint as rumor, a lantern bobbed and steadied. Another joined it. "They're on the farm track," Sophie called, voice snatched thin by wind. "Mr. Drake keeps his powder dry." "Let him come," Honoria cried. "We shall baptize his boots." The burn cut the moor like a black vein swollen with rain. Where the stepping stones ought to have been was a roar and a froth and a memory. The little bridge, a plank on piles, tilted like a drunkard's oath. "We cannot cross there," I said. "We must," Honoria said. "The ford below is deeper and Drake rides better horses." We dismounted. The burn snarled, white-mouthed. I eased onto the plank. It shuddered, dipped, found itself again. Honoria came behind me with the coffer. For 3 steps we were a proof, balanced over oblivion. A shout rang up the slope. Lanterns leaped, slid, came again. The plank sagged under the coffer's weight. "Give it me," I said. "You cannot." "I can." I set my feet wide, slid my arms under the iron bands, and took the coffer's dead weight into my chest. Cold iron bit. The world narrowed to the slick wood beneath my boots and the ledger's stubborn heart beating against mine. A gust slammed us. The plank shifted. One iron band knocked at my wrist. The coffer wriggled like a live thing. My heel slipped. I went to my knees, catching the coffer's rim with my forearms as water rushed up and over, black and choking. "Ada!" Sophie shrieked. "Hold!" Honoria said, voice knotted with terror. "Hold!" Lanterns flared on the bank above. Drake's voice carried as neatly as if he were in a drawing room. "Give over, Miss Harrow. The law prefers its papers dry." The plank bounced. My arms burned. My fingers screamed. The coffer slid, an inch, 2, toward the torrent's lip. I hooked my elbows, kissed cold iron, and offered up the stupidest prayer I have ever made. Not the book, not the book. Another surge hit. The coffer tore free of my grip, skated across the tilted plank, and pitched down into the black water. "After it!" Honoria cried, already in the burn to her knees, skirts billowing like a drowned nun's habit. Sophie flung herself at my collar and hauled me backward by sheer indignation and bone. The coffer, blessed by the weight of justice or by St. Cuthbert's whim, caught for an instant against the root-humped bank. I lunged, cold knifed up to my waist. Stones punched my shins. My hands found iron and slid and found it again. "Help me!" I gasped, and Honoria's grip closed over mine, elegant gloves ruined, and together we heaved. The coffer came up like a relic, vomiting water, heavy, with our future. We stumbled across by force and faith. Behind us, Drake swore with exquisite diction as his boot sank. We ran, if what we did deserves a verb, staggering, soaked to our ribs, the ledger clouding my thigh with every desperate step. The castle's black shoulders loomed. The chapel's crook-fingered bellcote beckoned like a priest insisting on duty. Dawn had not yet made up its mind, but the household had. The chapel glowed with candles. The aisle was a slender river of people. Pew doors creaked. silk-breathed. Mrs. Cobb's bonnet bobbed like a wicked lily. Mr. Pembroke, our grave little chaplain, stood at the rail with his book open and his mouth making the good old words as if they were bread. Dearly beloved, we are gathered. We were, indeed. It seemed as if every soul in Northumberland had crammed itself between those walls to watch duty-wed money. Benedict stood at the rail, stripped to essentials, black coat, white linen, the hawk ring a pale flash at his hand. Beatrice was white satin and steadiness, a veil that had never believed in fairy tales. The dowager gleamed like carved jet. Montfort's smile would have sliced bread. We did not look like wedding guests. We looked like shipwrecks. The congregation rippled. The dowager rose half an inch, then thought better. Mr. Pembroke, bless him, did not stop. He only lifted one eyebrow minutely, as if to say make it quick or make it eternal. I pushed the chapel door wider. Water pooled at our hems. Reed's men, caps wrung, faces shut, slipped in behind us like a weather front. I felt Benedict's gaze strike me, then fasten on the iron in my hands with something like prayer. If any of you know cause or just impediment, Mr. Pembroke intoned, why these two persons should not be joined together in holy and matrimony. I do, I said. It should have been a cry. It came out level, ironed flat by exhaustion, and iron itself. I ate a harrow dew. The words fell like a dropped key. The chapel breathed out and did not breathe in again. Mrs. Cobb's pencil sprang to life. The dowager closed her eyes as if struck a glancing blow between them. Montfort turned with the smoothness of a man taught to fence before he could read. Mr. Pembroke, he said, pleasantly. The term just bears interpretation. This is a dismissed servant with a grievance. Pray proceed. Mr. Pembroke, Benedict said, equally pleasant and not at all. The term cause bears weight enough. He came down 2 steps. I came up 2. For an instant, we were almost eye to eye, the world a hush, the coffer between us a third heart. Courage, he said without sound. Honoria lifted the latch on the coffer. The water that had not yet run out made a shameful noise on the flags. Inside lay the buckram book and the late Duke's letter, edges beaded with river like a benediction. I set the ledger on the rail. Its soaked cover looked obscene in that place. Profane as truth invariably is at first. Produce your books, I said to Mr. Drake, who had taken up station at Montfort's elbow with his tidy malice. We have produced ours. Drake smiled. A forged entertainment. Reed stepped forward and laid his caps on the rail like offerings. I'll swear to this page, he said, blunt as a stone. And Jack Peveril there, and Tom Crane, and Betsy Hobb if you like, though you don't invite women to settlements unless they're carrying baskets. We saw the crossmark where no right man would write it, and we were turned off with winter not finished. Mr. Pembroke looked from the ledger to Montfort, from Montfort to Benedict. We might, adjourn. We shall do no such thing, the dowager said, voice like a drawn rapier. If there is filth in my chapel, we shall wash it out with daylight. Mrs. Cobb's pencil whirred. Filth in my chapel, she murmured, delighted. Montfort took up the letter between 2 fingers as if it were something dead one must remove from the nursery. A touching fiction, he observed. My Lord Duke, if you cannot govern your friends, govern your servants. It is my father's hand, Benedict said, steel thin under linen. Mr. Pembroke, read. The chaplain coughed and obeyed. He did not hurry. He did not soften. He read the sentence about shame and the line about exposing fraud in a public room with witnesses, and when he reached the words, do not let him bind you with marriage, a sound ran through the pews that was not quite a gasp and not quite a prayer. Beatrice's face changed. It did not shatter. It learned something. She took the letter from Mr. Pembroke with a courtesy that shook. She read. Twice her lips formed ashamed. When she lifted her eyes, I saw a woman who had stood her whole life in a fur-lined cage and found it had a door. Beatrice, Montfort said softly, warning curling like smoke. She did not look at him. She looked at Benedict, and then at me. Her hands were steady on the paper. Her voice, when she found it, was not. She began. I release. Silence, Montfort snapped, and reached, not for his daughter, but for the ledger. Montfort's gloved hand closed on the ledger as a hawk closes on a rabbit. I slapped my palm atop it. No, I said, and it surprised me how calm the word sounded over my own racing heart. Benedict stepped between us. Not rough, not pleading, simply immovable. My father wrote that fraud must be named in a public room with witnesses, he said, voice carrying to the last pew. We are in one. Here are witnesses. Montfort smiled, the kind of smile that sells rope to men about to be hanged. And here is the law. He inclined his head. Drake produced the foreclosure notice like a conjurer producing a dove. Before the paper could touch the rail, Mr. Reed spoke from the aisle, hat in his hands, dignity like a lantern around him. And here is something truer, he said. Deed his late grace set with me and Mr. Pembroke as witnesses, trust for Evermere's lands and tenants against mischief and misrepresentation. Executed April of 17, sealed with the hawk signet and the parish seal. If a mortgage be procured by fraud, the trust takes precedence, and any encumbrance is voidable in equity. He lifted a folded parchment tied with old green ribbon. You'll forgive a steward for learning his letters. The chapel stirred, as reeds stir in a gust. Mr. Pembroke, who had been made of dutiful silk all morning, became suddenly oak. I witnessed that instrument, he said, grave as tide. As surrogate for the bishop, I keep a registry of such deeds. He laid a hand on the ribbon. Shall I read? Montfort's gaze cut to Drake. I saw the solicitor's lids flicker, the smallest tremor of arithmetic under his skin. He recovered. A rustic talisman, he murmured. At best, a pious hope. At worst, the law. Benedict finished softly. Read, Mr. Pembroke. The chaplain broke the ribbon. Words fell into the air and changed it. Whereas any security be obtained by concealment or false account touching the mines known as Cuthbert's Cross, such security shall be held for naught. Trustees empowered to defend the same in chancery. Each clause was a rung up, which my soul climbed back to its rightful height. Montfort laughed, short and bright. A pretty arrangement, dukes binding themselves with string. Even if it is valid, your grace. Will you feed your tenants with parchment? Where are your coals for winter? Where is your credit, your ready cash? Why, here, he tapped Drake's foreclosure. In my hand. Beatrice stepped forward then, white satin steadying itself upon bones. She did not look at her father. She looked at Benedict, and when she spoke, her voice carried, without effort, Your Grace, Benedict, she said, and my name for him on her lips felt like a blessing given back. I release you. The words slid into silence like a blade into its sheath. She turned, and in that turn, I saw a woman discovering her own shape. Marriage made of coercion is not worthy of me, she told the room with a composure that was like courage stretched tight. Nor of him. Mrs. Cobb's pencil squeaked. The dowager's fingers tightened on her stick, knuckles like pearls. Montfort's mask cracked. Beatrice. She bowed to him without warmth. You have mistaken me for coin all my life, Papa. I declined to be spent. For a heartbeat, I feared he would strike her with the old weapon. Shame. But too many eyes were upon him, and some belonged to men who owed him nothing, and to women who had not yet forgiven him the diamonds. He turned his fury on the ledger, lunged for it. Drake, a dark ripple behind him. But Benedict's hand shot out and found Montfort's wrist with a grip like iron wrapped in civility. Enough, Benedict said. The word went through the chapel. Honoria stood like a banner at his back. Reed's men made a wall of caps and shoulders. Old Cuthbert's broom leaned against the rail like a staff of office. Mr. Pembroke, Benedict said without taking his eyes off Montfort, mark the trust deed in your book. Copies, to be made at once and sent to Mr. Justice Pelham and to the bishop's registry. Mr. Reed, give Mrs. Cobb what she needs to make the truth indestructible. Mrs. Cobb's head snapped up like a hound scenting fox. Your Grace, Mother, he turned at last to the dowager. I have tried to be the duke you taught me to be. Let me be also the man my father wished me to be. The dowager met his gaze for a long moment. I saw the stubbornness in her age, wrestle with the pride in her blood, and, deeper, the knowledge that we had nearly been yoked to rot. Then be him, she said quietly, and do not shame me by doing it halfway. Something in my chest loosened. Benedict looked at me, and the entire world simplified to the distance between us. He mounted 2 steps, faced the congregation, and spoke without ornaments. I will not marry today, he said. I will bring suit in chancery to void the mortgages for fraud and set the mines to lawful account under the trust. My tenants and servants are my first creditors. Those who wish to quit my service on account of scandal may do so with an extra quarter's wages, and my blessing. He swallowed, and the smallest rawness roughened his voice. As for my heart, he found me as if the chapel had emptied. Miss Ada Harrow, he said, and everything he was, duty, grief, salt wind, stubborn, honor, stood with him. You risked your name for my house and your place for my people. You gave me courage when I had none. If you can forgive the hour at which I ask it, if you can forgive that I ask it in public, will you be my wife? The chapel breathed again. Gasp, sigh, whisper. Honoria's hand flew to her mouth. Mrs. Cobb all but dropped her pencil. Beatrice's eyes shone. The dowager stood so straight, her cap trembled. Montfort's curse cracked, like a pistol shot, over my dead body. Preferably, Honoria murmured. Benedict did not glance away from me. Ada. My name in his mouth was a place I had never known I could live. All the roads in my life seemed to run to that one word. Miss Harrow, Mr. Pembroke said gently, because even a parson hungered for an answer. Do you... I opened my mouth as the chapel door burst wide, and Drake's voice cut through like a knife. Stop. The diamonds the Riviere has been found on her person. And Sophie, breathless and blazing, cried from the threshold, Liar, I have it here, from Mr. Drake's own saddlebag. For a moment we were all weather and noise, gasps, whispers, the furious buzz of bees jarred in a glass. Sophie, rain-sparkled and triumphant, held up the riviere like a cold sunrise. Water caught on the stones and flung white fire over the pews. "Where did you find it?" the dowager demanded, a judge in jet. "In the solicitor's own saddlebag," Sophie panted, chin high. "Pritchard saw him ride out from the stables with it slung light. I went for a needle and thread in the harness room, as one does when one is vexed. And there it lay under a handkerchief that smells like bergamot and rappy." Every head turned to Drake. He made a game attempt at a smile and failed. "How unfortunate," he murmured. "One is sometimes misled by servants." "By yourself," Honoria said sweetly. "You planted the clasp in Miss Harrow's reticule. The wax on its tongue betrayed you." "Mr. Reed," Benedict said, not turning, "would you be so kind as to accept our solicitor's immediate resignation?" Reed stepped forward with a little bow of satisfaction. "With pleasure, Your Grace. Mr. Drake, your room is not ready." Drake's composure sloughed. He moved for the side door. Quick, tidy, only to find old Cuthbert planted before it, broom crosswise like a pikeman in a print. "No," Cuthbert said, all the C in one syllable. Mrs. Cobb scribbled as if writing saved lives. The dowager lifted her chin to Beatrice. "My dear, will you accept your diamonds from the hand of one who is not a villain?" Beatrice stepped down, took the riviere from Sophie, then, bless her, bypassed her father to place it on the altar rail. "They are only stones," she said, very steady. "We will not let them be more." Montfort's face had gone the color of old tallow. He looked around him and found no purchase. "Evermere," he said softly to Benedict, "you have made an enemy." "I had one already," Benedict replied. "Now I have witnesses." He looked to Mr. Pembroke. "Sir, the chaplain closed the trust deed with care. The law begins here and will continue elsewhere," he said. "For today, it is enough that conscience is obeyed." His eyes came back to me with unembarrassed curiosity. "Miss Harrow, about the question that fell among us." "Yes," I said, and my voice felt like sunlight after weeks of rain. "Yes, Your Grace. Benedict, I will." There was a sound that was not applause and not prayer, but some good cousin to both. Honoria made a delighted noise that might have been a sob in a dress with better breeding. Beatrice smiled, tremulous and genuine. The dowager, who had weathered more storms than a lighthouse, leaned hard on her stick and closed her eyes, just once, as if laying something down. Benedict's fingers found mine, warm, certain. "Then we shall do this decently," he said. "No theft of hours or dereliction of forms, Mr. Pembroke?" The chaplain's brow creased delicately. "The special license prepared for the ceremony at 11 names two parties who are, clearly, otherwise engaged. But the bishop has made me his surrogate for this parish. If both of you swear that you are free of impediment and that you have resided here these last weeks—" "I have," I said, thinking of long corridors and short nights. "Then I can issue a common license this morning," he finished, relief warming his tone, "and marry you within canonical hours." He smiled at the eastern windows where dawn was brightening from pewter to pale gold. "At 8. Then at 8, Benedict said. He turned to the congregation with a duke's ease and a man's humility. "Those who wish to attend may go change their stockings. Those who wish to eat may raid my larder with my blessing. Those who choose to gossip are requested to at least spell our names correctly." Laughter, grateful as bread. Montfort pulled himself tall. The handsome mask had returned, but it fit badly now. "We shall meet in Chancery," he said. "We shall," Benedict agreed. "I will bring my father's letter, my steward, my chaplain, and the trust deed. Bring whatever remains of your conscience." Drake, attempting to slide sideways past Cuthbert's broom, misjudged the old man's center of gravity. The broom flicked. Drake stumbled and found himself on his knees in the vestibule. There are few positions less flattering to a solicitor. He recovered, fled into rain, and did not trouble Evermere again. By 8, the chapel was washed and aired. The pews smelled of beeswax and salt. The sky had put on a gentler blue. The sea pretended innocence. I stood with Sophie behind the little screen first, to shake like a leaf and then to laugh like a girl. "Hold still," she scolded through tears, tucking a sprig of hawthorn, Cuthbert's offering, into my hair. "You look as if you might bolt." "I have been bolting all week," I said, dizzy with joy. "Now I will stand." The dowager came to me before the bell. I curtsied so low my bones knew their place. "Your Grace," I whispered. She studied me, saw what she needed, nodded once. "You will send me to an early grave," she said, "and then you will keep my son from foolishness. You may begin by not letting him build a folly by the cliff." "I will try," I said, and felt her hand, surprisingly warm, take mine and squeeze it. Beatrice kissed my cheek like a benediction. "Do not hover," she whispered with a watery smile. "Dance, and write to me." Mr. Pembroke's book opened again. Morning poured through colored glass and made pagan confetti on the flags. Benedict took my hands, those hands he had first held in a yew-shadowed alcove, and the world grew exquisite and manageable. "Wilt thou?" asked the Church of England in her old beautiful voice. "I will," I said, and felt the rest of my life step forward. We signed. Mr. Reed bore witness with his solid name. Honoria flourished her signature as if it were a banner. Old Cuthbert scrawled his mark with such pride I could have wept. The ring went onto my finger, a simple band the dowager had worn when love was young. It warmed at once as if it had been waiting for my skin. When we came out into the garden, the yews shone with little prisms of rain. The sea threw its glitter. Tenants and fishermen and kitchen maids lined the path and cheered until the gulls took offense. Mrs. Cobb tucked her pencil away, and to my horror dabbed at her eyes. "Do not print me maudlin," she warned no one in particular. Benedict bent his head to mine. "A promise kept," he murmured. "Midnight, garden, you, and a tomorrow we chose," I said, and the words tasted of salt and sweetness together. By noon, riders had gone to Newcastle with copies for council. By evening, Montfort's house had shuttered itself as if to snub the weather. Drake became an old story told to frighten apprenticed clerks. The trust deed sat under lock and parish seal. The mines were set to lawful account. The cottages burned warmer. Beatrice left for her aunt's in Yorkshire with her head high, and a letter in her pocket from me that said only, "Write when you can be careless. I will come." That night, when the house had at last stilled and the wind had turned kind, I walked to the yew gate opposite the chapel without a candle. He was there, of course he was. He would always be, I think, as long as the sea told stones to be brave. "Wait for me at midnight," he had once said. "I have," I answered now, and his hand found the ring his mother had given and the life we had built, and we stood in the old green hush where everything had begun, unafraid at last of anything that might be listening.